Anat Peled investigates that failure and the tragedy that ensued, as well as the wider implications. And she discusses all of that now with Michelle Martin.
Thanks, Christiane. Anat Peled, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the details of your reporting, we are speaking now, we are acknowledging it's been a year since the October 7th Hamas-led attack on southern Israel. There have been a number of memorials. I assume there were memorials and commemorations happening throughout the country. You went to one of them. Would you just tell us about it?
Sure. So I attended one memorial in the evening, and it was organized by families of hostages and bereaved families, of people killed on October 7th. And this was a ceremony separate from the government. They couldn't agree on a unifying ceremony. And it was just giving space to all the stories. I mean, not all of them, but a lot of stories of victims, people who survived, returned hostages. It was just a very painful kind of way to reflect on a difficult year that Israelis have had.
It is interesting that the government wanted to have one observance and the family members, many of the family members wanted a different one. Can you just describe what was the point of difference? Do you know?
Definitely. So basically, the government is very contentious in Israel. It doesn't have very high approval ratings, and polling shows that if elections were held right now, Netanyahu would not be able to form a coalition. The families couldn't agree with the government on a common ceremony, and the government decided to hold a pre-recorded ceremony without an audience. And the families felt, and other critics felt, that this was to avoid protests during the ceremony, and they wanted a live audience. And so they tried to, come to an agreement, but at the end, they held their own ceremony, and it just kind of gave voice to their pain.
Interesting. There's a lot right there, isn't there?
Yeah.
We specifically wanted to talk with you about a report that you filed for the Wall Street Journal this week. It's titled, How the Massacre of Ignored Female Soldiers Came to Symbolize October 7th Failures. I have to say, of all the things that I've read and all the reporting that I've seen about the events of October 7th, this has to be just one of the most painful for so many reasons. What was this specialized unit? What were they tasked to do?
So these young women are known as field observers, tatzpitkaniot in Hebrew, and their job is basically to watch borders. So they will be placed in dangerous areas, for example, near the border with Lebanon, with Gaza, in the West Bank, and they will have to literally sit in front of screens, and they watch each woman, part of the border area, and also a few hundred meters into Gaza, and they cannot take their eyes off the screen. It's forbidden. So if they have to go, to the bathroom, they have to be replaced. And what they did is they basically just had to alert. That means forces in the field. They had phones and radio next to them, and if they saw something suspicious on their screens, they would have to alert the forces in the field that something was happening.
Why is this an all-female unit?
Right, it didn't used to be, but it got changed, I think around 2001.
The heart of your piece is this. These soldiers sent repeated warnings of unusual and suspicious activity at the borders. Your reporting says that these warnings were sent up. It's not that they didn't see them, but they were repeatedly ignored. In fact, we focus on a number of the soldiers, particularly one named Maya Desiatnik. Walk us through what they were seeing. For people who haven't seen your piece yet, walk us through what they were seeing and what happened when they made these reports.
Yeah, so Maya is one of the observers who actually survived, one of two observers who survived that day. And what she was telling me, and others who were not on the base that day, is that they were seeing months leading up to the October 7th attack, basically practice drills. So one young woman told me that she saw a training exercise, including a mock tank and a fake kidnapping going on inside Gaza, not too deep because then they wouldn't have seen it. Another girl said that she basically saw people dressed in all black and their face covered, which they were taught to identify as part of the Nukba unit, which is the Hamas elite unit, and they were pointing at different observation points and then drove away. And these young women basically saw tons of activity. They saw large groups of Palestinians coming closer to the fence several times a week. They would try to breach, they would be armed, they would play with the cameras, And these young women were alerting their superiors that this was happening. It's important to note that on Friday, October 6th, it stopped. There was silence that day, and that also probably should have raised alarms.
What happened to this space and this group of soldiers?
Yeah, it's really tragic. On October 6th, they have a celebration. They have a party because one of the girls, Shafak Misani, it's her last night on the base. And they have a meal. It goes till 11 p.m. And so the girls get up at 4 a.m. And around 6:30, they start to hear sirens. Now, it's not usual sirens. It's tons and tons of sirens indicating that barrages of rockets are coming in. So we have the Situation Room, which is where they have their stands, and they sit in front of the screens and watch the border of Gaza. And so those young women are watching the border, and suddenly they see dozens of militants breaching, heavily armed with RPGs, grenades. We would learn later that more than 150 would come in and into this space, only this space. And so the young women are calling, kind of frantically, and we have some recordings of this, calling their superiors, calling the forces in the field, saying, guys, they're breaching the border. What happens is they also breach the base, and they were never prepared for an invasion of the base. And so Maya, who's a survivor, told me that they basically hid the young woman in a small office for 6 hours. Militants were outside. A few armed soldiers tried to kind of fight them off because these women are all unarmed and failed. And militants threw in grenades and set the Situation Room on fire. What happens is basically everyone is killed there and burned basically alive. Maya manages to escape through a small bathroom window, she and a few others. Now, elsewhere on the base, we have the rest of the observers who were not on duty. They're in their pajamas, and we also have videos of this. They escaped to a small concrete shelter where they basically send their parents goodbye messages because they understand that you're shooting around them, they understand the situation. Then the militants enter, throw grenades, they shoot, and they kill everyone except for 7 young women who are taken to Gaza. It's important to know that before they were taken to Gaza, Hamas militants made a video of them. Basically, they're sitting bloodied in front of a wall, and this video has come out and you can watch it, but basically what they're looking at is the bodies of their friends, and that hasn't come out. And then they're taken to Gaza. So basically they're killed, these girls who warned for months.
It's almost disrespectful to talk about the numbers, but just so that we understand the scope of this, how many people were killed that day in this gruesome fashion?
We know at least 8 other military bases and outposts of the Israeli army were breached that day. In this base, over 50 soldiers were killed. Of those soldiers, 15 observers, and they were unarmed, and 7 of the observers additionally were taken to Gaza.
Do we know whether any of these women are still alive?
So 2 have come back, 1 alive in an Israeli rescue mission, 1 dead. Her body was retrieved. The 5 remaining women are believed to be alive, and 3 hostages that I've spoken to saw them in Gaza, wounded but alive, around day 50. So that's many days ago. But
many days ago.
Be alive.
There's so much here to try to understand. Like, first of all, why are they unarmed?
Yeah, they weren't considered combat soldiers. So only combat soldiers in the Israeli army will, have arms with them. If you're not a combat soldier, if you're a cook, if you're in intelligence, you may not have arms. That's one of the questions that the parents are asking, and the IDF is going to have to investigate.
Well, why was the base so lightly defended? You said, so the women themselves were not armed. The observers themselves were not armed, okay? So you said that they were classified as non-combatants. Okay, but why was the base, which was at a forward position, so lightly defended?
We don't have a good answer to this. So the IDF is conducting a more tactical investigation about what went wrong that day, and it hasn't released the results of that yet. But we don't know. There weren't enough forces on that day. It was a holiday, it was a weekend, and so it seemed to have been more emptied out. We don't have a good answer to that. That's part of the tragedy.